When you're working with WordPress theme templates, it'll be very common for you to need to write if statements, conditional statements in PHP. And that's what we're looking at in this video, some of the different types of those. So first of all is the if statement. It simply says if something is true, then do something. That's all there is to it. So if the variable a is greater than 10, print this. Now you can see this written another way. I like using this end if structure here, but you will see it written sometimes in PHP with the curly brackets, opening and closing things here. And there could be any number of statements and lines of code in between this. I'm just using a very simple example here, but the curly brackets get a little bit tough to track, I find, over time. I like this, you know you're ending the if statement here. And here's an example of having more material between. And in this case, we're switching out of PHP here, going into HTML, and then going back into PHP briefly. That's why it's enclosed in the two brackets, to end it. So I can put anything in the middle there that I want, including more PHP, of course, as we'll see. One other thing to note, you'll sometimes see this exclamation mark there. What that means is not if there aren't any posts. So if they don't have any posts, it's an easy way to quickly negate something. So in this case we're saying if there aren't any posts, then do the following. Alright, the if statement's helpful, but it is a little bit limited. We might want to put other conditions on it. So for example, the if-else statement says if a condition is to be met, do something, and if not, then do something else. In other words, there's a fallback position, so to speak. If the condition's not met, if a is greater than 10, do this, or do this, because it must be true that everything is 10 or less. Here's an example from the loop in the 2010 theme. If it's an archive, or if it's a search page, then do the following. Then, for everything else, do this. That's a good example of using an if-else. Now we can really get complicated with the if-else-if statements. So if a condition's to be met, do this. Else, if there's this other condition being met, do something else. Finally, our else statement has the fallback. Do this for everything in the other circumstances. So for example, if it's greater than 10, print that. If it equals 10, then the number is 10. Else, the rest of them must be less than 10. Let's take a look at how you use this in the loop. A long example. Here's the start of our loop, the main loop in the WordPress default theme. And I've separated this by a lot of lines to make it easier to see. Here's the start of a large conditional. In fact, we're going to test for two things and then have a fallback position. So if it's a gallery item, do this. Else, if it's an aside item, do this, do all of these things. Else, for all other cases, do the following. And in fact, there's a nested conditional. You can nest as many of these as you want, of course, and that's where it becomes important to know which else does this refer to. Well, you follow it back and it's for this one. And if we get right to the bottom, then we see, and this is a great idea to do, where you can, is comment things. So this is telling us this is the final of our if-else-if statement. Here it is, the very final one, and then end the loop. Now very briefly, I want to talk about while statements, which you just saw. That's what the loop is. That's what it's named after, because it loops. It says, while this condition is met, do this over and over and over again until it's not met anymore, and then you end while. So that's what the loop is, and there we have the start of the loop. This is a little simpler loop for us to look at. That last one was pretty complicated. So while there are posts, get us the post information. Then we can extract other post information like the ID, like the excerpt, the content, and so forth. And we just do this for each post that meets our criteria. And there's our end while, the very end of the loop. So those are some of the control structures you can use in PHP to set conditions for various parts of your template. And it gives you a lot of power and lets you meet a lot of different conditions simply and easily through a single file.